What's up, y'all, and welcome to another edition of Black Diplomats podcast. I got another great show for y'all today with some even greater guests. First up is Nola Haynes, who teaches international relations at Georgetown. And by the way, I visited her class recently, and that was a lot of fun. And she is a member of the reconvened International Security Advisory Board at the United States Department of State. Then we have Christopher Schell, a fellow in the American Statecraft Program at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And he is the leading researcher on all things Black Americans and their views on foreign policy. So he's the top-notch, top dog for that. So got two great guests to talk about all the foreign policy stuff of the week. So what's up, y'all? How y'all doing?
Hey.
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here.
Same.
Yeah, man. Chris, I've been saying, man, bro, we got to get you on the podcast, man. And so I'm just so happy that you're back on. And so we had a really great time when we met up in D.C. a few weeks ago. And I want to thank y'all both for coming out to my talk at Syracuse University at the School of Journalism. I really had a good time talking with folks, and that was just part of me traveling around the country, talking about Ukraine and talking about the election, how this is a foreign policy elections. But before we get into all this stuff, I want to do a mental health check. That's one thing that I'm really passionate about. Before we get into all this heavy stuff, I just want to see how y'all doing. So Nola, what's going on with you?
You know, it's so funny. I have been using this term the past couple days that it's been a little challenging being Black at the table this week.
You wanted to cut somebody out? That's what you want to say? You want to be like, you had to hold it together? I feel you. But how you made it through, though. You made it, you rolled on through.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I know that's right. I know that's right. People try you.
And in these spaces, these hallowed spaces, these rarefied spaces, you have to prove why you should be here. It's not a situation where we're here and that's fine. No, it's a constant proving ground. And that can sometimes just be a little exhausting and draining.
Hey, listen, like Michelle Obama said, they're not that smart. And so we have the First Lady of the United States always that we can refer to. And not only that, too, I just find it interesting sometimes when, we get into it with our folks about us being in these positions where, the white power, we're a part of the quote unquote white power structure. It's like, y'all think that we're just welcome in, like the cast meow or the guests. You don't think we got our own shit to deal with? You know what I'm saying? And so it doesn't matter how much you achieve, bless you, how much you achieve. Like, you always are dealing with proving yourself when you really don't have to prove anything. And it can be taxing on us in ways that a lot of people don't even imagine, Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Chris, how about you?
I'm doing well. I just want to echo everything you're saying. Both Nola and you, Terrell, you hit it right on the head. Being in these rooms, even though we put the work to be in there, there's this idea, and especially in this age of DEI and just affirmative action, that you're just there to meet a quota of some sort. When it's like, no, you have the intellectual prowess, the expertise, if not more expertise, intellectual prowess. But that's a whole other conversation. But to answer your question, I'm doing pretty good. Like a bit tired mentally. Been doing a lot of writing and thinking and researching, and that labor, as I'm sure Nola knows, is just as taxing as it is, I would say, trying to lift some bricks and put a building together or fix some pipes. All labor is labor. So I'm at a point now where I feel like I kind of need a vacation in the Bahamas or something. I don't know.
You need to take it. I know there are a lot of people who don't take their PTO.
I'm one of those.
Especially if they have unlimited. Why?
We could unpack that. This whole you know where that comes from. Come on now.
Yeah, I get, but okay.
Already being messy. You're like, why, Black man? I want to hear you say it.
You know what, though? So, look, I know why, but at my last job at The Root, we were owned by Gizmodo before the private equity came in and just turned it to hell. But we had unlimited time off, and I always took unlimited time off. So I took anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks off every year. But I had a very supportive editor who encouraged us all to do it. And at the time, the Root was the most successful site from a money revenue perspective and et cetera, within the larger portfolio. And so we pretty much able to do what we want. But also I was at a union shop. And so we
That's a big
had the
difference.
legal right to do that. And I think that's a very different thing from people who are not a part of union shops, right? That's a big difference. But yeah, bro, trust me, I know why. I was just saying.
No, I know.
So
I'm just messing with you. I know you know.
I know. All right, y'all. So let's get into Putin's nuclear threats. So look, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin said in an interview with Russian state television this week that he's ready to use nukes if his country's independence or sovereignty were threatened. So let's listen to part of that interview, which was translated by Sky News Australia.
Vladimir Putin has warned Russia is ready to use nuclear weapons if there is a threat to his country's sovereignty or independence. In an interview on state television, the Russian leader described US President Joe Biden as a veteran politician who fully understands the dangers of an escalation in tensions. He claimed Russia's nuclear capabilities are more advanced than the West's.
The United States announced that they were not going to send troops. We know what American troops are on the Russian territory. These are invaders. This is how we will treat it, even if they appear on the territory of Ukraine, and they understand this. I said that Biden is a representative of the traditional political school, and this is proved. But besides Biden, there are plenty of other specialists in the field of Russian-American relations and in the field of strategic deterrence. Therefore, I don't think that everything is rushing so head-on here, but we are ready for this.
All right, so here's some facts. Putin has threatened to use nukes since the start of the war, in the second invasion of Ukraine, by the way, a couple years ago. And he starts saber rattling about nukes, especially when he realized that Ukraine would not fall as quickly as he and Western intel agencies figured that it would. This may be his 11th or 12th nuclear threat, so this really ain't new, y'all. Then also it's important to note that he's running for president again this week in what will be a sham election. He's expected to win his 5th term, adding on to his reign as the longest serving leader of Russia, surpassing Stalin if he serves the full 6-year term of this election that he's expected to win and going to this new term. So Nola, what do you think about Putin's nuclear threats, given the fact that you work on arms control?
Well, first and foremost, I got to state that I am not here representing the United States government this evening in any way. In my personal capacity and in my capacity as a researcher in this area, you're right, Terrell. He's been saber rattling since day one. But just to provide the listeners, with context, this latest threat is also on the heels of Macron, the president of France, also making comments about potentially, just kind of doing a very loud thought experiment about potentially sending boots on the ground, into Ukraine to help them with their to help them on the battlefield. So since that was announced, since that statement was made, it's been a lot of amped up talk about Russia's nuclear arsenal and a lot of securitizing and signaling that they will absolutely use them to defend their sovereignty, which I think is also an important part, an important caveat to the threat. It's not saying, we're gonna nuke everyone. It is this caveat of what they feel is a violation of their sovereignty. And then to your point, Terrell, yes, it is also about the elections. And we're also going to hear some stuff in the news about some townships and stuff that Russia has made some advances on that will sound a lot larger than life. But in reality, strategically speaking, it's not. So I just kind of want to also put that out there too. So let's get ready for the misinformation, disinformation barrage that we're going to be treated to until the election.
Yeah, absolutely. Because another thing is that as somebody who lives in Ukraine and actually travels around the country when Putin makes these threats, Ukrainians are not even taking it seriously anymore. In fact, there have been running jokes about what will happen once Ukrainians realize that the nukes are going to be falling down on them. And there was this ongoing joke about I don't know how to describe it, but basically they were like, okay, we're going to go to this mountain, in Kiev, and we're just going to have a big orgy, right? They were just, and so, and it was just going all around Ukrainian social media, and they don't take it seriously anymore. But on another note, what's important to think about is that when Russia talks about sovereignty, keep in mind that Dmitry Medvedev recently said that Russia doesn't have any borders. Also, keep in mind when he talks about sovereignty, he means that the countries that were formerly occupied by the Soviet Union. And so these countries, Ukraine, the Caucasus, he's referring to the Central Asian countries that were under the Soviet Union. He considers that sovereign land because it was sovereign land of the USSR.
Right.
And so,
Well, he can consider what he wants to, legally speaking, what the dimensions of Russia are. That determines that sovereignty. He can do it if he wants to.
But here's another thing. But look, and I'm gonna kick it off to you, Chris. But I've been to Russia, and it's a long time ago. But I don't know if either of you have actually traveled to Russia. But Russia is a humongous country. When you walk around Russia, you feel like you're just in a black hole that will never reach the bottom. And I'm not saying that negatively. It's just such a vast place. It covers roughly about a dozen or so time zones, and they have so much of their own land. I would just feel overwhelmed by worrying about anyone else's.
Right.
And, and that's the whole, like, you walk around Moscow, even when you know where you're going, you feel lost simply because it's just such a huge, humongous, and engulfing place. And for the life of me, I don't get why Putin, well, I know why Putin wants to do it, but I just would feel so overwhelmed with my own land that I wouldn't even think about anyone else's. But Chris, what about you, man?
No, I mean, that's a really good point. I think Nola really made a really good point. My mind was going, seeing what Macron said about the whole idea of putting NATO boots on the ground. That's something that I think what's interesting is that in many ways, even from the West perspective, I mean, me personally, for Ukraine to be effective in its counteroffensive, I mean, it may take some form of boots on the ground, but also too, I think Putin also sees that the West has not wavered in the way that he had kind of expected it to. I mean, we see what the $300 million aid package that was recently passed. Read a bunch of different reports about different European nations. I will argue, NATO and different European nations are pulling their weight in terms of providing security for Ukraine. So I think that's something else that we're kind of seeing from Putin to a degree, is the fact that he expected to see enthusiasm, resolve for Ukraine falter after a while, like you were saying about Western intelligence agencies. And that necessarily hasn't really been the case. I mean, definitely countries like Germany, even the US could do more in providing security guarantees. But I would definitely say this is kind of like you were saying, saber rattling.
Actually, we are kind of hamstringed by Congress. I mean, trust me, there's
That's true.
everybody and their mama wants to do something about Ukraine. Trust me, this is not a situation where people are just sitting around twiddling fingers. I can promise you that.
Yeah. No, for
That's
sure. No, definitely. And I could even add on to that. I was in a focus group yesterday. I think it's okay to probably share this information. But even with just tying it back to, in this case, what Black folks are thinking, I was in a focus group with several, maybe like 30 Black people who are over 30 years old. And one of the questions that were raised about what's the top foreign policy issue, the first one was the war in Gaza, and the other one was the war in Ukraine, or Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And what actually came up, which was actually even striking too, was that this anxiety over the use of nuclear weapons and trying to see some formal end to the conflict. Now, how we get there, that might look different. But you're right. I mean, there definitely is sentiments, even I would even say amongst Black folks, whom I saw in a focus group, sentiments around how can we prevent a World War III? And obviously, Putin will have a different ending in mind. And even I would even say, different Republicans will have a different ending in mind than what the American Democratic Party will have in mind as well.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I want to kick off straight into the next section where we talk about why Black people should care about foreign policy. So you just kicked it right off perfectly. And really, when I think about Black people and their response to Gaza and Ukraine in particular, this is a foreign policy year. So just think about all the major subjects that's going on right now. We've been focusing on Gaza and Ukraine, but we do know that we have a country in the Western Hemisphere that's dealing with a major issue with what they don't have, many elected officials. They don't have a president. And also they have gangs that are running the country. So we have that in our own hemisphere. We had the situation with Sudan right now. We haven't really spent that much time talking about Congo. Also, we have this larger conversation about a possible conflict with China over Taiwan. There's just so many things
Nigeria.
on the table. Yeah, in Nigeria. Yes,
Nigeria
in
came and went.
Nigeria.
Mhm.
Right. So, but here's the thing. I've never believed that, generally speaking, that our elected officials who have the responsibility of making these choices about America's foreign policy, they really don't do a good job of breaking it down for the rest of us so that we can understand it. And I think that at a very basic level, if you ask people what is foreign policy, you will get a wide range of answers. And so when I travel around the country and talk about Ukraine, for example, I also talk about what's foreign policy and how I break it down. And how I break down foreign policy is simple, which is it's nothing more than how you choose to live in the world, how you believe it needs to be governed, how you ought to be governed, and how do we live how do we live together? How do we deal with ourselves from a business standpoint? How do we deal with ourselves from an economic standpoint? It's basically, how do you all feel the world should be run? At a very base level, I feel like when I break it down to people like that, then they feel safe and comfortable to really start talking about their opinions. And I feel like as a subject expert, then I can come in and give more specifics, but everyone feels comfortable talking about the issue of foreign policy, because let's be real, we have a lot of opinions about the economy, but we're not economists. We have a whole lot of opinions about healthcare, but most of us aren't doctors. So why can't we have a similar reaction and passion and have strong opinions that we feel are informed about foreign policy? And I just feel like that's just one area where, just as a country, I think I could do a better job of really welcoming people into these types of conversations who aren't a part of our circles, right? You, Chris, and me, Nola. But Nola, I'm curious about your takes on how Black people are responding to foreign policy, what you've been observing, and in ways in which we can engage our community on this topic more.
I love this question. Before my mom died, I was actually writing an article about this, but I couldn't see it through to completion. So years ago, part of my dissertation, one of the things that I was able to do was to get a question about foreign policy and national security on a survey done out of UCLA, and at that time, it was such a big deal just because I just asked blatant questions about people's thoughts and feelings about national security and foreign policy. It wasn't wrapped around immigration. It wasn't wrapped around a specific policy issue. It was just, what are your thoughts and feelings about foreign policy, national security? Do you think about it at all in your everyday life? Right. So it revealed some interesting things, but it was only two questions. So I wasn't able to get a lot of robustness out of it, but it did say some things. If it feels like it's part of Americans' lives, then it's going to adjust behaviors and feelings around it. Because if it's something that feels very, very, very far away, something that doesn't impact your life, then you're not going to spend time thinking about it. And most Americans, and this specific survey was something called multi correlates, which means that it was a race based survey, which was really important for me because I wanted information from a certain group of people. Um, and so what's very interesting, Terrell, you're right that this is a foreign policy election, but before we got here, you know, we have to remember how how this particular administration started, having to keep the promises of the administration before. We started off with a very, very ugly and rocky Afghanistan. And I know that we forget about Afghanistan, but I worked in that sector for 2 years. I will absolutely never forget about Afghanistan. So the foreign policy president started out with foreign policy that needed to be addressed, right? And so we had been hearing about Afghanistan for 20 years. Most Americans wanted to get out, but seeing people jump off airplanes is not what anybody wanted to see, right? So it was about the optics of the situation. So the optics make it feel like it's closer to you, right? And then some of the dynamics that change with Ukraine, Russia, Terrell, we're part of that shift. You know, you had, for the first time, you had Black experts talking about this in a way that's relatable and digestible. And we're constantly engaging what is foreign policy. My take is a little bit different. You know, I say it's a set of stated policies and agreements with another country. But just the fact that we're out there talking about it, trying to offer education about it in non-traditional spaces, kind of opened it up. And I know that I do Black media, and I'm talking about it when I'm invited on to do, shows. So I think we have to give ourselves for being part of that shift and more people talking about it, because we told them how important it is to their dinner table. And then with Israel and
Yeah.
Gaza, you have where the optics really, really made Afghanistan, not the best foreign policy situation that any administration wants to be in. Fast forward to Israel and Gaza, where it is amplified. The optics are
Yeah.
amplified. It feels closer to home.
It's
Brown
also called the mother of all conflicts.
Exactly. Brown people are being
Yeah.
displaced, colonization, all the things, right? So, and then the optics. So when it feels like home, you care about it more, right? So I'll leave it there because I can go on
Yeah.
forever. I'm sorry, Chris.
No, no, I know you're all good. So Chris, look, when you talk about this being home, I have found that just in my experiences of traveling around the country, it's easier to get Black people inclined to talk about Palestine and Israel, because when you think about the relationship between Palestinians and Black people in the civil rights era, that we have that decades long history. And I've looked at a couple of your studies, right? And there are a couple of them that a couple things that stand out. One, you did find that there's Black people there, a high number of Black people were very concerned about what was going on in Gaza, but then also with Ukraine, there was another distinction that they were concerned about U.S. troops going to Ukraine, particularly via NATO, because our communities have a disproportionate percentage of people in the armed services, and none of them want to see their loved ones dying in Ukraine or anywhere for that matter. And nothing punctuates this point more than those three Black service men and women who were killed in Lebanon some weeks ago. And so I'm just curious about in your own work, because really you've really done the important work of really thinking about Black people's minds and foreign policy. And so, what are some other points that Black people care about? Going to Nola's thing of, hey, when it feels home, we feel it more.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And before I answer your question, I just want to build on what Nola was saying about feeling at home. And I think there's the first bucket of trying to tackle foreign policy for Americans, and then when you disaggregate that, you start talking about Black folks. I mean, the historian in me can't help but to think about how Black people. Historian Gerald Horne makes his argument that Black folks have fighting American Jim Crow, domestic racism, so on and so forth. A solution for them was to look for allies elsewhere, look for allies abroad. And I think, this is not to say that doesn't take place for other American racial minority groups or even white Americans, but in particular for Black folks, our unique domestic situation made Black folks, both intellectuals, Black intelligentsia, and working class folks. I mean, there's several books on Black working class women who looked to Imperial Japan. It wasn't even just Du Bois. How it forced them to look abroad to see, okay, how are these rise of other non-white nations slash empires going to impact us? So I think in particular, what we're seeing with Gaza is an extension of that. It's an extension of this desire for Black folks to look abroad and see, okay, where can we find allies or partners? Maybe allies might be too strong of a word, or partners in our struggle against, we could call it white supremacy or white terror domination, however term you want to use. But then to get back to your main point, so those are the two inflection points. So what's interesting, the main ones, yes, the war in Ukraine are heavy on people's mind. Definitely the Israel-Gaza situation. But another thing that I even want to really draw out too was that on the questions I've surveyed about climate change, and that's something that Black folks really do feel like is something that the U.S. should be taking a leadership role on. So just to kind of go back to what you were saying about what is foreign policy. For me, if I had to talk to a toddler, I would say, foreign policy is what is the U.S.'s place in the world? What leadership role should the U.S. have? And that's something that I also want to stress. And I've kind of feel like is that it's easy to like typify Black folks that we look internally, so we might be a bit more isolationist. But I would say that's not necessarily the case. Like you were saying, we may be less enthusiastic about engaging in military campaigns, sending troops abroad, as Nola was saying, getting bogged down in 20-year military campaigns. But that doesn't mean that Black folks don't think that the U.S. should have some leadership role. And one thing that I've seen is that in this case of trying to combat climate change, there's a slew of studies that show that the majority of Black folks reside in the American South, in coastal cities. Climate change is going to impact those areas particularly. And another thing that
the Gulf of Mexico, by the way, and then
mm,
the Gulf of Mexico. Then you also have to think about Miami.
yeah,
You then also think about South Carolina.
yes,
The coast there. Yeah, the entire Delta. Yeah, and so I just wanted to add. I just wanted to just give people, put it in people's minds where these locations are mainly, especially because we mostly reside in the South, like you said. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah, and it came up again. I mean, so what I'm referring is like some of my old studies, but the focus group I was in yesterday, when the question was posed, what issue was on your mind? Yes, Gaza came up. Yes, Ukraine came up, but climate change definitely came up. And I think that's something that's an international issue, but also particularly domestic, especially for Black folks. Another issue that came up as well was limiting the spread of nuclear weapons. A majority of Black folks felt that the U.S. should take a lead on trying to stop the spread. But what's interesting, I did a crosstab. Black folks who felt American race relations were bad were more inclined to want the U.S. to take a leadership role in combating climate change, stopping the spread of nuclear weapons. And there was another one. It was the promotion of democracy globally. Ideally, I would say not at the tip of the gun or the spear. But what's interesting is that there is in the Black community a sentiment that the U.S. should have a leadership role. It's just one that's not really being led by what I would call a muscular foreign policy.
I agree. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
That's interesting because on all of those topics we are leading. So that says to me this kind of segregated messaging that happens inside the Beltway and then only through certain mainstream media channels, because listening to what you just ran through, Chris, and knowing for a fact we are leading on those issues. And actually, Department of State is releasing a vast climate report soon, talking about a lot of these different things. So it's interesting. One of the things that I see a vulnerability is these things aren't being telegraphed well. And I would say once upon a time there was a reason for it, because there was very elitist thinking, that these complicated ideas that, you don't want to bother the American public with, they don't care about it anyway. But as Chris's study shows, that is not the case. People are interested in these things, and it has to be more than us talking about things that are actually happening, that can actually help people feel better once they come out of surveys like that, because surveys can give people anxiety. But what can also help people is to say, well, did you know that this was actually happening, A, B, C, and D? Chris, I see you want to say something.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you're saying, and this is one of my gripes about messaging. I feel as if, and there's a slew of reasons that's probably leading to what I'm about to say, but when it comes to any administration, so I don't want to just attack the President Biden's administration, but when they do come and talk to the Black community, they're going to the Breakfast Club, they're talking to our rappers, they're talking to our athletes, which I think serves a purpose. I mean, to me, a limited purpose. But I feel like there are plenty of Black folks who can speak on these issues, and when they do, or when there is some type of like interface with the Black community, like three of us sitting right here, that could be a proper conversation that then could get disseminated in a wide manner. And I know there's a million one different ways to attack the messaging, but that's been one of my pet peeves.
Yeah, I get it. I get it, definitely. And I say this as somebody who's done presidential elections, and I've interviewed elected officials, and I could tell you straight up, because I've had people tell me why I was not selected, why a principal decided not to interview with me, because they thought I would be too tough on them, right? And so, and that goes with anybody, right? I don't care about what administration it is. I don't care what person it is. It's much easier to go on the Breakfast Club when you deal with somebody who, and again, no disrespect to Charlemagne or any of these other people who are not versed in this stuff in the ways that we are. And it's not even a matter of being tough on the candidate. It's just a matter of they may not be comfortable taking a more specific position or responding in a particular way, because they know we can ask the type of questions that will push them. Right. And I think another thing too is, even when these folks do talk to us, I think that just as a community, we have to cultivate a culture around being invested and being engaged when they do talk to serious people. Right. I think that's another thing that's happening too. But you can get on and on and on about that. But look, Chris, I want to talk to you about this Gaza and the uncommitted movement, because you do have some data on how Black people feel about what's going on in Gaza. And by the way, there have been, tens of thousands of people have been killed in Gaza since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, and Israel responded definitely disproportionately. And the civilians in Gaza have suffered from it tremendously. We see attacks going on in the West Bank, where I've visited, where there's definitely an apartheid state going on in that part of the world. And I literally saw it with my own eyes, and I refuse to unsee what I saw. For any of those people who are listening and watching and telling me that it's not apartheid, it's fucking apartheid. And y'all not gonna change my mind. But the people, especially Arab Americans, have been responding and, by saying that, hey, we're not going to vote for Joe Biden. And that's gotten a lot of controversy, important to note. And so you have a lot of Arab Americans, particularly those in Michigan, where they number around 150,000. Then there are tens of thousands of Arab American voters in Arizona and in Georgia. All three of these states are swing states. The uncommitted movement has started, during this primary, and by the Democratic and Republican primaries. And keep in mind that Joe Biden has pretty much secured the nomination, by the way. So I just want to make that clear. He has secured the nomination. Important to note. Also, the uncommitted movement has been moving on, and in some states, as much as 18% of the population decided to vote uncommitted. It was a very high number in Michigan, so same thing came up in Minnesota. And the uncommitted votes, ranged anywhere from 8 points up into the high teens. And so people have been taking this very seriously, and we see that the Biden administration definitely has been responding, right? And I think the strongest response yet has come from Senator Chuck Schumer in his speech on the Senate floor today. And by the way, if you don't know, he's one of the most pro-Israel members of Congress, and he said that Benjamin Netanyahu has got to go. So let's hear some of what he said today in regards to Benjamin Netanyahu and what's going on in Gaza.
The fourth major obstacle to peace is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has all too frequently bowed to the demands of extremists like Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the settlers in the West Bank. I have known Prime Minister Netanyahu for a very long time. While we have vehemently disagreed on many occasions, I will always respect his extraordinary bravery for Israel on the battlefield as a younger man. I believe in his heart he has his highest priority is the security of Israel. However, I also believe Prime Minister Netanyahu has lost his way by allowing his political survival to take the precedence over the best interests of Israel. As a lifelong supporter of Israel, it has become clear to me the Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. The world has changed radically since then, and the Israeli people are being stifled right now by a governing vision that is stuck in the past. Nobody expects Prime Minister Netanyahu to do the things that must be done to break the cycle of violence, to preserve Israel's credibility on the world stage, and to work towards a two-state solution.
So, if you got Chuck Schumer, and he went on to talk. If you got Chuck Schumer coming at you and saying that there needs to be a change, you basically fucked up. I'm just saying. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm just curious, Chris, what do you think about this uncommitted vote movement and in regards to pushing change? Because a lot of activists went on Twitter today to say that, hey, organizing works. And I know in some of your polling, you see that a lot of Black people also had concerns about what's going on in Gaza, and they also, their views about the administration are informed by what's happening in Gaza as well. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first, I want to definitely point out how you're right. The administration as well know that they made some poor decisions, to use for lack of better words. And I think you're right. And in the case, so I'm going to use this. So the administration's two major foreign policy challenges. So you have Ukraine, and Biden came out talking about the defense of democracy, the defense of a sovereign nation, and at the same time, I believe that the administration's hypocrisy was kind of shown, or very much so put on display, where, okay, yes, Israel does have a right to defend itself, but then when you go and now 30,000 Palestinians are dead, it definitely draws out the hypocrisy, and the American people we were talking about earlier are subtly paying attention to it. And what we're seeing with the uncommitted is an extension of that. I mean, I would say when it comes to just Black folks in general, I was seeing on Twitter in the last election talks about the, what was it called, voting down ballot, even when there were folks who were somewhat disillusioned with Biden and disillusioned with Trump, talking about going out and vote, but just voting down ballot and not voting for a presidential candidate. So this is something that we've seen before. We saw it back in 2020. And I would definitely say that what we're seeing, I don't know the racial demographics of what we're seeing with the uncommitted vote, but definitely it's Arab Americans, Muslim Americans coming out and saying, you have to earn our vote. 30,000 Palestinians are dead. You're not just going to get our vote. And in many ways, this is something that I think you see with Black folks. It might be for different reasons of more domestic concerns. But then and my data was showing that it's really more so amongst younger Black folks. So I even when I was talking on CNN, I don't want to give the impression that it's all Black people who are like, what's happening in Gaza is the reason why I'm not voting for Biden. And there's been a slew of other studies that have shown that Black folks in general have become a bit disillusioned with the Democratic Party well before we had October 7th and the ensuing, carnage. But in this case, for voters under 30 who are Black, seeing the hypocrisy, seeing just the blatant disregard of human rights is what I think you're definitely seeing in this major uncommitted vote. And to give a caveat, mind you, we are 4, 5, 6 months away from the election, and I think what we're seeing with the Vice President Harris coming out, and she demanded a ceasefire, but only for like 6 months. This is the administration trying to backpedal and realize that, oh snap, this rainbow coalition that we've put together might be faltering. Because that's really what props up the Democratic Party. It's the black voting bloc.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, we even saw the last election that white women came out, voted for Trump. Poor working class white folks voted for Trump. But really, what's critical to an election is racial minorities. And this, I think, this uncommitted vote is showing that the U.S.'s role in the world, standing behind these principles of democracy, human rights, the rules-based order, and not selectively picking and choosing when to enforce it, is going to bite you in the butt during election time.
Yeah, I was going to say, because another thing too is there are a couple trains of thought that I want to take to end this segment with is look, I am going to vote for Joe Biden. I am going to enthusiastically run my butt to my polling station, and I'm voting for Joe Biden. I can also understand why there are people who are Arab American who would not. You know what I'm saying? Like, I understand both parts of it, because for black folk, voting is how we get our political capital, our political power, right? Whereas and the thing is that I think that's a very important thing to point out in this, is that there has over the years been a response to our blood being shed on the streets. You think about George Floyd, you think about the Trayvon Martins of the world, you think about you think about Eric Garner, right? You think about Mike Brown. Yes, all of these black folk, there is a response to our blood being shed. With Arab Americans, I can't even say that about them. 30,000 people are being killed, and it's like our blood being shed. You don't value our bodies that way. And so if you don't value our bodies, then we're going to have to do the only thing that we know how to, we know that you respond to, especially in this country: money and power. So if I'm an Arab American and I have my particular experience in this country and in this world, and I know if you don't value my body, but you value my vote or the lack of it, I'm going to use it. And so for somebody to say, well, Trump is going to be worse, I think that's a very unsophisticated response to somebody's pain. Because if I'm being killed, thousands of miles away and my body is not valued, I think people can get numb and think, what's the difference? If I'm in their position, I can see how somebody would feel that way. I can also understand why I'm going to go vote. So I want them to get what they want. I also want my government to be responsible to all citizens, which goes back to the point that any Democrat running for office, they're going to have to unite this coalition of people across racial grounds. Whereas with Trump and the GOP and their white nationalism, they don't have to give a fuck about any of this shit. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line, right? And so because we have to give a damn about all this shit, we have to give a damn about all people. And this non-committed vote is proving that. So guys, I want to close out with our favorite misogynist, Andrew Tate. And, I don't know about you, Nola, but y'all females don't know how to act. And
female.
y'all females, y'all females don't know y'all role.
Right.
And and so Andrew Tate has been my mentor. I've been watching Andrew Tate low key.
I can tell.
The master misogynist. Okay. Yeah, but listen, there, so he is being brought up on more serious crimes here, to be serious. And so I'm going to read from a number of sources. So as you all know, this is according to the BBC, the Washington Post, and the UPI. Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan, and they were detained in Bucharest Romania on Monday after a UK police department said that it had obtained an arrest warrant in connection to some sexual assault allegations in the UK, where it dates from 2012 into 2014. And the allegations include, quote unquote, and I'm reading from the article in the Post, sexual aggression. And so they were detained because this UK warrant is saying that they want to extradite these brothers to the UK. Now, here's an important thing for y'all to know. For y'all to know, this UK case is a separate case from the Romanian case in which the two brothers and two Romanian co-female defendants are accused of rape and running a human trafficking ring. Okay, so this is a separate case for those who are listening. And so let's talk about the UK case. So basically, Vice News did a documentary on them, and Vice News, which is pretty much going down and being defunct because they shuttered their newsroom a few weeks ago. Particularly the website. And so these brothers have long faced allegations of sexual assault and violence. But before that, they became known as kind of leaders of the manosphere. And at first, they were just their, they were misogynists on steroids, and they would have all these very patriarchal ways about talking about women and their role, thus, females, right? And by the way, I just find it odd that a man would call a woman a female, and I don't. It's really weird. But it's for those of you who are not familiar with the manosphere, the person who really was, really taking on, at least in the Black community, was Kevin Samuels before he died, right? And these were the guys that said that women have their particular role, and basically they were, second to men amongst other things, right? But I want to really talk about this because, I feel like this whole thing about about misogyny, Andrew Tate has really taken this global. And when you look on YouTube and you see these guys say these terrible things about women, it almost sounds comical until you really get to situations like this where men are arrested for very serious crimes, right? And that's when it becomes serious. I'll tell you that when I first heard of Andrew Tate and he moved to Romania, I thought it was strange for a couple reasons. One, I can understand why I would move to Romania. If I was a millionaire, if I was a millionaire like Andrew Tate, however, somebody who doesn't have any connection to Eastern Europe, like it's one of the poor countries in the European Union, but once you realize that they have a high rate of sex trafficking, particularly to neighboring Moldova, you understand what his intentions are. I mean, the man literally said in an interview that he decided to move to Romania because he felt like it was pretty much lawless and he could do what he wanted. So, I'm just curious, Nola, in all seriousness now, like, this issue of misogyny, it's taking on a very global dimension, and I really think that it's quite dangerous. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how we can adequately respond to these harmful messages and how they're impacting men, mm-hmm. And as a result are harming women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've given this a great deal of thought for a few reasons. And before we crawl into this darkness, I kind of just want to shed a little bit of light by saying how grateful I am to. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. There we go. How grateful I am to know amazing men that support women, that are not intimidated by women, do not call us females, and are genuinely just happy, when we win it in life, So thank you. Thank you so much, for men like you. And I remember reading something about him a while ago that someone was validating what he was saying because his father's black. Is that true? He's
His father is black.
his father.
Yeah, they both are. They're both black. Yeah.
So what's interesting about that now, it adds a racial dimension, that harkens back to these kind of patriarchal ways of thinking and being, and grow up in a very, very, very Southern traditional context. You know, there's a difference. And Terrell, we talked about this last time I was here. There's a difference between being the leader of, your household, whatever those traditional kind of male tropes are. And then I actually don't see that as leadership. I actually do not see you subjugating women, oppressing women as leadership. In my opinion, it is the complete opposite. It tells me that you are small. It tells me that you are easily intimidated and that you really aren't a man, because to be a real man is to recognize the beauty of women and how we make each other stronger and better. That's just my personal opinion. But turning to the pivoting a little bit about this manosphere and the how this telegraphs outside um, of it's global, as you were saying, Terrell. And so what I've been seeing is that a lot of these young men are being conditioned, be it YouTube or wherever it is that they get their information, wherever they get their information. And we really have to treat it as almost like, being conditioned to be part of a insurrectionist cell or being inside of a cult. It is really that level of deprogramming, right? Especially these young guys that are believing they may or may not even really be millionaires or whatever it is that they're touting. We don't know that. People lie all day on the internet.
Yeah.
We don't know none of these things, right? Maybe you go to that country because it's easier to get women to believe that you're actually successful and rich. I'm just saying, right? So, these young boys, there's something that's missing. There's something that they're looking for, that they're going out and seeking what being a real man is supposed to be about. So this is a domestic issue that we definitely have to address in our country, because it doesn't just show up in sexual assault and violence. It also shows up with grabbing a weapon and shooting up schools and churches. Right. So all of this goes hand in hand, and it is an extreme issue, so much so that it got exported out globally, you know. Um, and just as
The
much as it
incels.
matters, huh?
The incels. Remember that guy in San Bernardino, I think it was some years ago, who said I couldn't get a woman or anything like that. It is all in his whole manifesto when he went out on that mass shooting spree. You
Oh, right.
remember that?
Yes, I do remember that. And
Remember that?
I remember
Yeah.
that. And I know we kind of mentioned passport bros. It's not the same, but it's this idea that, women who have jobs or women are too educated, we have to be trained, and that some of that we have to be stripped from our power and put back in our place. All of these things, have a relationship with each other. And speaking as a Black woman, considering, this is a huge issue in our community about all the single Black women, because we're too this, we're too that. We're never perfect. We're never perfect. We're either too much of something, and we need to be put back in our places. And that's just not something that's not messaging young girls should be receiving. And it's definitely not messaging young boys should be receiving.
Yeah, Chris. I'm just want to think about how I want to ask you how you're looking at this, particularly as somebody who researches things. I really would like to know more about these guys, because I'm telling you, I mean, I find it very troubling, because here's the thing, like, I don't know, I can't see how I would be a follower of Andrew Tate. Like, there is nothing that can happen in my life that would just make me say, to hell with it. I'm gonna go to Romania and participate in this tens of thousands of dollar camp that he has for men. And this was something that he did according to Vice, because
the war
they
room.
showed
Yeah, I saw that on the
the war room. Yeah, where basically you get your ass beat and you take it like a man. It's the because it's the stupid, right? It's the stupidest shit
yeah
that you can think of, and I will never for my life get it, but bro, I would be intrigued to get some data
Yeah.
on how these men do it. Yeah.
So a couple of things, and I'll be quick. So the first thing is his parents. So it's a shame. I know they're mixed race, but his dad is black. Terrible.
His dad is black.
I'm a huge chess guy. Emory Tate is his father, black international master. Very sad because the father was brilliant. He's revered in the chess world. So it's a shame that, the son of one of the very few, the chess world is very few black folks in the first place. So, yeah. So, and it's sad, but when people, now, like from what I've seen, when people find out about, like I've looked at Emory Tate's chess videos, and in the comments is, this is Andrew Tate's son, or, so like that's now how people are going to remember a black international master, but that's the different topic. The second thing is going back to research, and I wanted to say this, Terrell. I think because I saw some survey that said that Trump is like predicted to win 20% of the black male vote. That's probably going to change, But what I do think, I do think we've seen like a subtle, very subtle drift in black men drifting to the Republican Party. I'm sure there's various factors, but I wonder. My theory is that I do think that the Black Manosphere, Passport Bro movement. There's a couple of other ones.
Yeah.
I think that may be a shift in black men, a few, not a lot, a few black men to the Republican Party. And the reason why I say that is because this general idea of what you're saying, this rebellion against all the progressiveness that the Democratic Party does stand for. So, rights and protections for LGBTQ plus folks. This idea of equality for women. Some things that I've seen, like even you go back to like Kevin Samuels, you mentioned this idea of the welfare state and what the welfare state has done to the black community. So I think for those men who have gotten wrapped up in that, I wonder, don't have any data, haven't done any research, but I think that's worthy of seeing if the rise of Kevin Samuels in the Black Manosphere has in some way expedited the shift in black men from the black. So, and even other studies have shown that a lot of the black community is socially conservative, but we vote Democrat because we know the Republican Party is a party of white supremacy. So we still vote Democrat. So I wonder if it's in some way facilitated black men to go to the Republican Party. That's worthy of inquiry. But to get back to what you're saying,
Yeah.
I do think, that's one thing I would say. I'm 28 years old. I'm a young dude. I've seen on YouTube, Kevin Samuels was the big one, but there's a slew of these videos. Well, there's a lot of these white manosphere guys, and I've seen them, and they have very large followers. But another one that you kind of talked about who are just as bad, another group of guys like named Fresh and Fit, who I've seen.
Oh my God.
But they're also, and what also gets me, they're also very anti-Black American. I know this is a different topic. But not only
but they were banned too, though. I think they were banned on YouTube.
They were, but they have like 1.6 million followers. But I think that's another thing that also goes into it as well, is that there's a lot of anti-Blackness, a lot of misogyny as well. And I noticed that in a lot of their videos, like they've said stuff about how can Black people not come up, the welfare state. So I think that's another issue as well, where we're seeing this confluence of racism. This manosphere world is deeply racist. And what I've seen is one reason you did have like this breakaway of like the Kevin Samuels, because this manosphere world is deeply racist, misogynistic, all the things, So yeah, Kevin Samuels and them try to create their own separate world. But I think what you do have, and there's a slew of reasons that could lead to this, but I think, unfortunately, when you do have this vacuum, so when we talk about like gang violence in gangs, if you have this vacuum in masculinity, you have some Black men who might turn to the street life, and then that gives them some form of like masculine figure. I think for some other Black men, yeah, Kevin Samuels or the guy who's filming in his penthouse, he's attractive, So instead of like the guy on the corner with the Benz being some form of father figure, quote unquote, now the YouTuber who tells you about how to get girls in his penthouse, he's now attractive, but he's also spewing toxic, rhetoric and stuff. So I think like a lot of it, it's a coping mechanism. How like what the drug is different, but I think the manosphere, all these other isms that are on YouTube is what some young Black men or just older Black men, it doesn't really matter the age, are turning to.
And I just want to say really quick, I know we got to wrap up, but I do believe Carnell Belcher's polling firm they did a poll counter to that 20% narrative, and Roland Martin talked about it this week. So yeah, so there's some data out there about that 20% number.
Yeah. Which point? Yeah, and the point of it is that it's not going to be 20%,
Right.
right? So the reality of it, and it's never been that way. And so they're not going to. Black people have always been conservative, and so Trump is tapping into that lot of people, and so the overall black percentage has been between 8 and 12% over the past uh you know 4 elections or so, and there's not, and you're right, there have been some shifts but not consequential shifts. But you know I really think that in our world, where you have all of these predatory characters and actors going out, I and I think about Andrew Tate, I was really happy that he was finally caught, because I don't think that there's that much of a stretch between the misogyny that's spewed on YouTube and people's actual actions. So it didn't surprise me that when I just
Mm,
found out that, before I knew that Andrew Tate was just a misogynistic douchebag, I don't think it's a stretch to think that he could possibly sexually assault people.
yeah.
I just don't. I just don't,
Especially if he thinks that's what males are supposed to do, and women are
to
supposed to be
do.
submissive.
And I'll close out with this one and then get on a good note, is that I'll never forget when I was in Ukraine and I was helping people go to the border during the war. Um, there were a lot of cops waiting at the border, particularly at Poland, and I didn't understand it at first. But then someone eventually told me, these cops are looking for sex traffickers. And so even during a war, when people are literally internally displaced and refugees, I'm telling you, it didn't even cross my mind.
Well, that's kind of the stuff in Women, Peace, and Security, that we look at how women and girls' lives drastically change during war. And so prostitution increases, and so does sexual violence.
And it's just sickening, because these people are at the lowest points of their lives.
Yep.
And I just think it's unforgivable to take advantage of any human being when they're in that situation. I just think it's completely unforgivable. And so it would make sense why somebody like him would go to Romania. But then I also remember going into Ukraine, and and I can't say it for sure, but I saw these older men with what I thought were underage girls. When I would just walk around in the streets, and these girls, they looked like refugees. They were tattered, they were disheveled, all of these things. And so
I've seen it.
to me,
Horrible. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah, and so the shining light of all this is that Tate is being held accountable, and regardless of how much he denies it, like, in my personal belief, I could conceivably see that he did it, but I'm happy that the world is starting to pay attention to this man and his misogyny and his alleged crimes. But y'all, on a positive note, I am just so happy that we have this space where we could talk about these things, no matter how good, no matter how bad. And so you're right, Nola.
Mhm.
We've been changing. This has been a great trend, and right now, it's normal for us to talk about foreign policy. We take up our own spaces. Even in the spaces where we work for our full time jobs, we can create our own spaces like this one, like Roland Martin and others, where we are celebrated. And so I'm just happy that y'all came on the show. And I was really happy too that you're teaching international affairs at Georgetown. And I
Yeah.
was really happy that they were all female students.
Yeah.
Female students,
Yeah.
female
Oh,
students,
he's
right?
so
You
silly.
know, they're
Anyway,
that
yeah,
they're
because
all
we
females.
can actually read.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was really happy about that when I was talking with them, because I really hope that there is something that I can put into their minds that would make them believe in, or reaffirm that they will be the leaders of our world.
Mhm.
And so and they should be, and I'm happy that you're teaching them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I was so happy that you stopped by my international relations and race class, which is a huge departure from my space security class that I teach right before it. So it's definitely, my brain is like split in two. But my IR and race class, both of those classes, the kids are the future, but specifically in that class, for them to believe that they are the future. That's the part, right? Um, that's what you did, Terrell, by talking to them, just as human beings. and them seeing you and how what you've done, like a Black man living in Ukraine just because what, like this Black woman, she has on Jordans today, like what, and she what, so
Yeah,
the
you
way
did
that
have on the J's. Yeah.
the way we show up in the world, and who we are as Black folks, Black Americans, and bringing that our authentic selves to these spaces, that's what inspires kids. That's what gets them excited about going out to do this work, because they can see themselves in it. So thank you.
Thank you for, yeah, of course. Thank you, Nola, and thank you, Chris, for coming on. And this is not going to be the last time. And really, man, you are getting data on our thoughts about foreign policy
Yes,
and
congratulations.
specializing at it. Yeah, I mean, you're doing really critical work, and I'm looking forward to all of the great work that you're going to be doing in the future, because we care about these things. And like I said, I'll always cite your work when I'm talking about what's on Black people's minds as it pertains to these issues in Ukraine and Gaza, etc.
No, thank you so much. No, thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm honored to be in the presence of Dr. Nola Haynes.
Oh,
Got to bow down. But just real quickly, talking about that, I have a follow up survey coming out on the Black folks in the war on Gaza. So don't know what the results yield yet, but if it's really something interesting, I'll definitely tap in with you, let you know what it says.
No doubt, no doubt. And I'll post it on my Twitter as always. All right, y'all. This has been another great episode. Appreciate y'all for listening, and especially y'all who are watching on YouTube. So talk to y'all again next week.